For the past year, I had been living in my son's mansion in Westchester County, not as a guest, but as invisible help. After Robert, my husband of 42 years, passed away from a sudden heart attack, my son James offered me shelter in what he called the East Wing Guest Suite. What began as a kind gesture slowly transformed into silent servitude. I cooked breakfast by 6 every morning, prepared lunchboxes for my grandchildren, Emma and Tyler, and had dinner on the table by 7 sharp. I cleaned, I organized their lavish dinner parties while my daughter-in-law Victoria strutted around in her Jimmy Choos as if I were the hired help she never bothered to pay. Still, I swallowed my pride, thinking family mattered more than comfort or dignity. The arrangement was never formally discussed. James inherited his father's investment firm and was always traveling to London, Tokyo, or Dubai, rarely home long enough to notice the tension that hung like stale perfume around Victoria. I told myself I was doing this for him, until I realized I was no longer seen as a mother, but as a shadow moving in the background of their luxury. "Mother, could you make sure the guest bathroom has fresh towels?" Victoria would say, not looking up from her phone. "And please use the good soap this time, not that cheap stuff you bought." I'd nod silently, though I knew very well the cheap stuff was from the same boutique where she purchased her overpriced lotions. I wore second-hand dresses from the church charity shop while Victoria posed in Chanel and Gucci. She never missed a chance to correct me, mock my old-fashioned ways, or exclude me from family events. When Emma had her ballet recital, I wasn't told until the morning after. When Tyler won his science fair, I learned about it from the framed certificate I dusted on the mantelpiece. "Oh, I thought James told you," Victoria would say with practiced surprise whenever I discovered these exclusions. He never did, because she never told him to. My friends from the senior center, the few I was still allowed to see, noticed the change in me. Martha, my oldest friend since college days, pulled me aside during one of our rare coffee meetings. "Ellen, you look exhausted," she said, her voice low with concern. "And that cardigan has seen better days. I thought James was taking care of you." I made excuses. "He's busy with the merger. Things will settle down soon." But they didn't. My small retirement fund dwindled as I spent it on necessities Victoria deemed not urgent household expenses. My blood pressure medication, comfortable shoes for my arthritic feet, the occasional birthday gift for my grandchildren. I shared a roof with family, yet lived in complete isolation. I ate dinner alone in the kitchen while they entertained in the dining room. I watched my grandchildren grow through the photos Victoria posted online rather than through hugs and conversations. Christmas came and went with a gift card to a department store I couldn't afford to shop at. My birthday passed unmarked except for a hurried call from James from an airport lounge. But it was during their New Year's Eve party that the final crack in the illusion appeared, revealing a truth I was no longer willing to ignore. The mansion filled with the elite of Westchester and Manhattan. Bankers, lawyers, socialites whose names appeared in the society pages I used to flip through while waiting at the doctor's office. I wore my plain black dress, the one I'd worn to Robert's funeral, and refreshed with a different scarf, trying to stay out of sight and out of the way. Victoria had made it clear my role was to ensure the caterers didn't slack off and to keep an eye on the coat check. As the midnight countdown neared, James finally arrived, having flown in from Chicago just in time. His smile was dazzling, his arm wrapped around Victoria's waist as they made their grand entrance. For a moment, watching him laugh and greet everyone, I saw Robert, the same crinkle around the eyes, the same dimple. My heart ached with pride and longing. Then something unexpected happened. He broke from the crowd, walked over to me, and embraced me tightly as if everything were normal, as if I weren't the ghost in his home. And then he said it, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Mom, how are you liking that $7,000 monthly allowance I've been sending you? Is it enough? I can increase it if you need more." I froze, my glass of sparkling water nearly slipping from my fingers, my breath trapped somewhere between shock and confusion. The chatter around us continued, but I could feel several pairs of eyes turn our way. I haven't received anything, James," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "Not a penny. I've been working as your housekeeper for the past year." A sudden hush fell over the group near us. James stepped back, his champagne flute tilting dangerously as his eyes darted in disbelief. A woman in a red dress, Stephanie Porter, one of Victoria's closest friends, covered her mouth in a poor attempt to hide her surprise. "What are you talking about, Mom? I set up the transfers last January, every 5th of the month like clockwork." That was when I saw her. Victoria, dressed in a glittering gold Versace gown that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, standing in the corner with a glass of Dom Perignon and a smug smile. She was watching the scene unfold like it was her own private theater production. Her laughter, silent to most, rang like a warning bell in my ears. Something inside me snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. The fog of guilt and obligation that had clouded my judgment for months suddenly lifted. "Perhaps you should ask your wife about those transfers," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "She handles all the household affairs, doesn't she?" The room grew quieter still. James looked from me to Victoria, who was now making her way through the crowd toward us, her smile fixed, but her eyes sharp as flint. "What's this about missing money?" she asked, with practiced concern, placing a manicured hand on James's arm. "Ellen, honey, have you been drinking? You know how forgetful you get." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the onlookers. I hadn't touched alcohol since Robert's wake. "I don't forget $84,000, Victoria," I replied. The math was simple enough. 12 months at $7,000 each. And I certainly don't forget working like a servant in my son's home while wearing second-hand clothes. Victoria's smile never faltered, but her grip on James's arm tightened. "James, darling, your mother is causing a scene. Perhaps she should lie down." But James wasn't looking at his wife anymore. He was looking at me, really looking at me, for what felt like the first time in years. His eyes traveled over my faded dress, my worn shoes, the hands that had aged from constant cleaning. "Mom, I've been sending the money through Victoria's assistant," he said slowly. "She told me you preferred to manage your own finances privately." The countdown to midnight began in the main ballroom. 10, 9, 8. "I haven't seen a dime," I repeated. "I've been using what's left of my retirement to buy my own necessities." 7, 6, 5. "That's absurd," Victoria hissed, her composure finally cracking. "James, you can't possibly believe—" 4, 3, 2. "Show me the bank statements," James said, his voice flat. "Now." 1. As cheers erupted throughout the mansion and Auld Lang Syne began to play, our small corner remained frozen in uncomfortable silence. Victoria's face had transformed from practiced charm to calculated fury. "It's New Year's Eve, for God's sake," she snapped. "We're not discussing financial matters now. Your mother is confused." But James was already pulling out his phone, navigating to his banking app. I watched as he scrolled through transaction after transaction, his face growing paler by the second. "They're all here," he said, showing me the screen. "Monthly transfers to an account labeled Mom's Allowance." "That's not my account number," I said after studying the digits. "I've never seen that account in my life." The party continued around us, oblivious to our quiet implosion. A waiter offered champagne, which we all declined with terse waves. Victoria's eyes darted around the room, calculating her escape route. "This is ridiculous. I have guests to attend to." She turned to leave, but James caught her wrist. "Don't move," he said quietly. "We're going to figure this out right now." I should have felt vindicated, perhaps even satisfied, but all I felt was a profound sadness. In that moment, watching my son's world collapse around him, I realized how distant we'd truly become, how he'd trusted his wife's word over the evidence before his eyes, how he'd failed to notice his own mother's suffering beneath his roof. The party raged on, glasses clinking, music swelling, couples kissing, while our family began to fracture beyond repair. In the reflection of the ballroom's ornate mirrors, I caught glimpses of Victoria's face as she realized her carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble. Gone was the gracious hostess. In her place stood a cornered predator, eyes calculating and dangerous. That night, as fireworks exploded over the Hudson River and guests celebrated the promise of a new beginning, I made a silent resolution of my own. No more invisibility, no more silent suffering. This would be the year I reclaimed my dignity. whatever the cost. In the days that followed, James moved me to the main guest room and apologized profusely. He swore he'd been sending the money every month through Victoria's assistant, Megan. He showed me bank statements, transfer confirmations, even the initial setup paperwork. The pieces began to fall into place. Victoria had rerouted the funds, intercepting every transfer, all while keeping me under her roof as unpaid labor. "I don't understand," James said one evening, his head in his hands as we sat in his wood-paneled study. "Why would she do this? We have more than enough money." I realized this wasn't ignorance on his part. It was trust, blindly placed in someone who saw me as disposable. Victoria hadn't just stolen from me. She'd stolen from him too. His relationship with his mother, his chance to care for me properly, his understanding of what was happening in his own home. "It's not about the money, James," I said gently. "It's about control." I didn't cry. I didn't rant or rave. Instead, I observed. With my new position in the household temporarily secured by James's guilt, I paid attention to Victoria's routines, her passwords, the way she bragged about her control over everything. One morning, I overheard her on the phone in the garden, speaking in hushed tones. "No, Richard, he doesn't suspect a thing about the Cayman account. Keep everything moving as planned." Her lover, her financial advisor? I couldn't be sure, but I wrote down the name. I noticed how she managed the finances, how James never questioned her dominion over his wealth. He'd given her full access to their accounts, signing papers she placed before him without reading them, trusting her completely with the fortune he'd built. She thought herself untouchable, and that made her predictable. While James was busy with damage control, ensuring I had access to funds, apologizing repeatedly, trying to understand what had happened, I began my own investigation. I started small, volunteering to help organize Victoria's home office while she was at her spa appointments. "Mom, you don't have to do that," James protested. "I want to," I insisted. "It helps me feel useful." What I didn't say was that it also gave me access. I began documenting everything. Old receipts showing purchases made in my name but delivered to addresses I'd never heard of. Bank statements left unattended on Victoria's desk, revealing regular transfers to an entity called Nightshade Ventures. Credit card bills showing charges for designer clothes bought in my size but never given to me. Conversations I overheard between Victoria and her personal assistant about the old lady's money. I learned the name of the shell company where she funneled the stolen money. I photographed documents with my old flip phone, which she dismissed as too outdated to be a threat. I watched and waited, collecting threads to weave the web I'd one day pull tight around her. "Ellen, could you water the orchids in the sunroom?" Victoria asked one afternoon, barely glancing up from her magazine. "And there's a dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just 20 people. The caterers will handle most of it, but I need you to arrange the flowers." "Of course," I replied mildly. She had no idea that I'd spent the morning photographing documents in her private safe, the combination carelessly written on a Post-it and stuck to the underside of her jewelry box. James traveled more frequently now, burying himself in work to avoid the tension at home. He'd made a half-hearted attempt to confront Victoria about the missing money, but she'd woven such a convincing tale of misunderstandings and banking errors that even he seemed confused about what had actually happened. "Mom, maybe there was just some mix-up with the accounts," he suggested during one of his brief visits home. "Victoria says she's been trying to sort it out with the bank." I simply nodded, letting him believe what he needed to. I couldn't force him to see what he wasn't ready to acknowledge, that his wife had been systematically embezzling from his own mother while forcing her into servitude. Instead, I focused on building my case. I discovered Victoria had been siphoning money not just from my allowance, but from James's business accounts as well. Small amounts, never enough to raise immediate alarms, transferred into offshore accounts and then into Nightshade Ventures, a company I eventually discovered was registered in her maiden name. While dusting the bookshelves in James's study, a task Victoria insisted I continue despite his protests, I found financial records showing discrepancies dating back years. Victoria hadn't just started when I moved in. She'd been bleeding his accounts slowly, methodically, for their entire marriage. I made copies when I could, took photos when I couldn't. I stored everything in a secure email account I created at the public library in town, far from Victoria's prying eyes. "You seem different lately, Ellen," Martha commented during one of our coffee meetings at the local diner. "More purposeful." I sipped my coffee and smiled. "Let's just say I'm taking control of my situation." "Does this have anything to do with why Victoria was asking about power of attorney forms at the country club last week?" Martha asked, her eyes sharp. "Caroline overheard her talking to that sleazy lawyer. What's his name? Richards?" Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I thanked Martha and added this information to my growing file. Victoria wasn't just stealing from me, she was planning something bigger. Something that would give her control over everything, including me. The trap was closing, but not around me, around her. With patience and precision, I prepared the stage for what would come next. Victoria continued her facade, acting as if our New Year's confrontation had never happened. She'd convinced James that it was all a misunderstanding, that his poor, confused mother had simply forgotten about the separate account she'd set up for me. "Memory issues at her age are quite common," I overheard her telling James one evening. "My Aunt Sylvia was the same way before they moved her to Sunshine Meadows." Sunshine Meadows was the assisted living facility on the outskirts of town, the one Victoria had been leaving brochures for around the house. The implication was clear. She wanted me out, preferably somewhere I couldn't interfere with her plans. I contacted a lawyer, Sarah Goldstein, a quiet, discreet woman who had once been helped by Robert when her family faced foreclosure during the 2008 financial crisis. We met at a small cafe in Terrytown, far from Victoria's social circle. "This is extensive," Sarah said, leafing through the documents I'd brought. "You've been thorough, Mrs. Wilson." "Ellen, please," I insisted. "And I've had plenty of time to observe." Sarah reviewed my evidence and nodded, impressed by the meticulous research. "This isn't just theft from you. This is systematic fraud across multiple accounts. Your daughter-in-law could be facing serious charges." "Will it be enough?" I asked. Sarah tapped her pen against her legal pad. "It's a strong start, but we need more. Specifically proof that she knowingly diverted funds that were meant for you, and evidence linking her directly to Nightshade Ventures." She guided me in setting a trap that wouldn't just expose Victoria, but leave her no escape route. We needed to catch her in the act, documenting her direct involvement. I began sending anonymous tips to financial auditors at James's firm. Nothing specific enough to trigger immediate action, just enough to put certain accounts under routine scrutiny. I reported discrepancies to the tax office regarding Nightshade Ventures, ensuring that red flags would be raised at the right time. But the masterstroke came when I learned about the upcoming anniversary gala, a charity fundraiser celebrating James and Victoria's 10 years of marriage. James had planned it as a surprise, a grand gesture to honor his wife publicly at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. 500 guests, the elite of New York society, and a special announcement he'd been keeping secret. "Mom, I want you to help with the event," James told me, his eyes bright with excitement. "You've always had better taste than any event planner, and it would mean so much to have you involved." I agreed, of course. Victoria was livid but couldn't object without raising suspicions. And so I found myself with unprecedented access to guest lists, vendor contracts, and most importantly, to the technical aspects of the event. "Mrs. Wilson, where would you like the presentation screen positioned?" asked David, the AV technician, during our walkthrough of the venue. "Center stage, please," I replied. "And I'll need full control of the media inputs." I volunteered to compile the anniversary video, collecting photos and clips from their decade together. Victoria, preoccupied with her gown fitting and speech preparation, barely glanced at my work. She was too busy crafting her image as the devoted wife and philanthropist to notice the trap closing around her. Meanwhile, Sarah had delivered a sealed report to Rebecca Winters, a journalist friend of hers with a reputation for tearing apart high society frauds. Rebecca worked for the Manhattan Examiner and had recently exposed several financial scandals among the city's elite. "I can't promise anything until I verify it myself," Rebecca told us during a confidential meeting in Sarah's office. "But if what you're showing me is accurate, this is exactly the kind of story I specialize in." All it needed was the right timing and the final pieces of evidence. I made sure every detail was in place. The guest list included key financial journalists, the press presence was secured through donations to their pet charities, and a USB drive containing all my evidence was hidden in the flower arrangement at the main table. The technical rehearsal the day before the gala gave me the opportunity to test my plan. While the staff was on lunch break, I connected my laptop to the presentation system and ran through the sequence I had prepared. Everything worked flawlessly. That evening, Victoria summoned me to her dressing room. She was trying on her gown, a custom Dior creation in midnight blue with diamonds sewn into the bodice. "You've been busy lately," she remarked, studying me in the mirror as her stylist adjusted her hem. "Almost happy." "I'm looking forward to the gala," I replied truthfully. "It's an important milestone for you and James." "Yes, well," she said, dismissing the stylist with a wave. When we were alone, her tone changed. "After tomorrow, we need to have a serious conversation about your living arrangements. James and I think it might be time for you to consider Sunshine Meadows. They have an excellent memory care unit." I smiled gently. "We'll see what tomorrow brings." As I left her room, I heard her on the phone again. "Yes, Richard. Everything's in place. Once James announces the new trust tomorrow, we'll have full access. The old lady won't be a problem much longer." I returned to my room and sent a final text message to Sarah. "Nightingale is singing. All set for tomorrow." I wanted Victoria to smile when she walked into the gala, to feel completely in control, utterly invincible, and then watch it all fall apart. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's Temple of Dender provided a majestic backdrop for the gala. Ancient Egyptian stone illuminated by modern lighting, the reflecting pool shimmering beneath the glass ceiling. It was nothing short of breathtaking. The event cost more than most people's homes, all to celebrate a marriage built on lies. I arrived early, dressed in a simple but elegant navy dress Martha had helped me select from Nordstrom. For once, I wasn't there to serve or remain in the background. Tonight, I was a guest, albeit one with a mission. "Mrs. Wilson, the technical booth is all set up according to your specifications," David informed me discreetly. "Slideshow cued and ready." I thanked him and made my final preparations. The USB drive was secure in the white rose arrangement at the head table, ready to be discovered at the right moment. Sarah and Rebecca were in position, seated at different tables, but both within view of the main stage. Guests began to arrive: senators, CEOs, celebrities, old money families from the Upper East Side. The kind of crowd Victoria had always desperately wanted to impress. I watched from near the bar as they air-kissed and complimented each other's designer wear, trading gossip and business cards with equal enthusiasm. At 8 o'clock sharp, Victoria made her entrance on James's arm. Her Dior gown caught the light, the diamonds sparkling like stars against the midnight blue fabric. Her auburn hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, her makeup flawless. She looked triumphant, queenly, secure in her position at the top of the social hierarchy she'd climbed so ruthlessly. James looked handsome in his tuxedo, proud to show off his beautiful wife. If only he knew what was coming. I felt a moment of doubt, a pang of motherly concern for the pain he would soon experience. But I reminded myself that truth, however painful, was necessary. The alternative, allowing Victoria to continue her schemes, would only lead to greater heartbreak. Dinner was served by white-gloved waiters: lobster bisque, wagyu beef, truffle risotto, crystal glasses filled with vintage champagne worth hundreds per bottle. The orchestra played softly in the background as conversation and laughter filled the ancient temple. At 10, James rose to give his speech. He thanked everyone for coming, spoke lovingly of his 10 years with Victoria, and then paused dramatically. "To celebrate our anniversary, I'm announcing the creation of the Wilson Family Trust," he declared, raising his glass. $20 million dedicated to supporting education for underprivileged children, with my beautiful wife Victoria as the sole trustee. Applause filled the room. Victoria beamed, her eyes gleaming not with philanthropic zeal, but with the calculation of someone who had just been handed control of millions. I caught Sarah's eye across the room. She gave an imperceptible nod. "And now," James continued, "a special presentation celebrating our journey together. Mom helped put this together. which makes it even more meaningful. The lights dimmed. The screen behind them flickered to life. For the first 30 seconds, everything proceeded as expected. Photos of their wedding, vacation snapshots, charity galas. Victoria's smile grew more confident with each image. Then the screen changed. The music stopped. A different presentation began. It wasn't the slideshow of vacation memories she had expected. It was a detailed exposé, bank transfers, audio recordings of Victoria's conversations with someone named Richard Dawson, emails confirming the embezzlement of hundreds of thousands of dollars from both my allowance and James's business accounts. Gasps filled the room. Camera flashes erupted as journalists recognized the story unfolding before them. Victoria's face drained of color as her empire crumbled in real time, her perfectly applied makeup now a mask of horror. "What is this?" James whispered, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "Victoria, what am I looking at?" She lunged for the podium. "There's been a mistake, a terrible mistake. This is fabricated." Her voice rose to a shriek as the presentation continued, now showing documentation of Nightshade Ventures and its connection to offshore accounts in her maiden name. The room erupted in chaos. Victoria tried to run, nearly tripping on her gown as she pushed past stunned guests. But Rebecca Winters was blocking one exit, camera crew in tow, while a discreet man in a dark suit, an FBI agent Sarah had contacted, approached from the other side. "Victoria Pearson Wilson?" he said, his voice carrying in the sudden hush. "We'd like to ask you some questions regarding potential wire fraud and tax evasion." James stood frozen on the stage, horror twisting his features as he realized the extent of her betrayal and the role he had played in enabling it. His eyes found mine in the crowd. I saw the moment understanding dawned, that his mother, the woman he'd allowed to be treated as a servant, had orchestrated this moment of justice. "Mom," he mouthed, his face a portrait of shame and realization. I stood quietly at the edge of the room, hands clasped, watching not with vengeance, but with the calm certainty of justice being served. The empire Victoria had built on lies and theft was collapsing around her, brick by brick, in front of the very society she'd so desperately wanted to impress. Victoria was escorted from the room, not in handcuffs, but with the firm understanding that she was not to leave town. The FBI agent handed her his card, instructing her to appear for questioning the following morning with her attorney. As the murmurs and exclamations rippled through the crowd, James made his way to me through the throng of shocked guests. "Did you know?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "All this time?" "Not all this time," I replied gently. "But enough of it. Why didn't you tell me directly?" I looked at my son, my brilliant, successful, terribly naive son, and spoke the truth he needed to hear. Would you have believed me over her? Or would you have dismissed it as the confusion of an aging mother? His silence was answer enough. He wrapped his arms around me, there amid the wreckage of his marriage and the ancient stones of a temple built for forgotten gods, and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Mom. So incredibly sorry." Over his shoulder, I watched Victoria being questioned in the corner by the FBI agent, her perfect world shattered beyond repair. She looked up, caught my eye, and in that moment finally saw me, not as the invisible help or the confused old lady, but as the architect of her downfall. In the weeks that followed, Victoria faced the consequences of her actions. The FBI investigation uncovered far more than even I had discovered. Multiple shell companies, fraudulent charity foundations, and nearly $30 million hidden in various accounts. She'd been planning to clean out James completely and disappear with her lover, Richard Dawson, a financial advisor who had helped her set up the complex scheme. The scandal dominated the society pages for days. "Socialite scheme exposed by mother-in-law," read one headline. "Wilson heir defrauded by wife, saved by mother," proclaimed another. I avoided the press, declining all interview requests despite substantial offers. This wasn't about publicity for me. It was about justice and reclaiming what had been taken. James, broken and ashamed, begged me to stay at the mansion to help him rebuild his life and reputation. "I need you, Mom," he said one evening as we sat in the garden where I had once overheard Victoria's damning phone calls. I don't know how to fix any of this without you. But I declined. You need to learn to see clearly on your own, I told him gently. And I need to remember who I am beyond being your mother. I had found a small apartment in Greenwich Village, a one-bedroom walk-up in a brownstone owned by Sarah's cousin. It wasn't luxurious, but it had tall windows that flooded the rooms with light, wooden floors that creaked with history, and most importantly, it was mine, paid for with the restitution funds returned after Victoria's assets were seized. Moving day came in April when the cherry trees were blooming along the streets. I didn't have much to pack, just clothes, books, and a few keepsakes from my life with Robert. James insisted on helping, carrying boxes up the 3 flights of stairs despite my protests. At least let me do this, he said, setting down the last box in my new living room. It's the bare minimum after everything. When he left, I stood alone in the center of my new home, listening to the sounds of the city filtering through the windows. Taxi horns, snippets of conversation from pedestrians, music from a street performer's saxophone. For the first time in years, I brewed coffee just for myself in a vintage percolator I'd found at a second-hand shop on Bleecker Street. I sat by the window, watching the world go by, no longer a ghost in someone else's life. I filled my new home with plants, books, and soft throws, creating a sanctuary that reflected who I was rather than who others expected me to be. I took a part-time job at a small bookstore nearby, not because I needed the money, the restitution had left me quite comfortable, but because I enjoyed the conversations with customers and the peaceful hours arranging novels on shelves. James visited often, usually bringing Emma and Tyler with him. Our relationship began to heal, slowly but steadily, no longer tainted by manipulation or misunderstanding. He no longer saw me as a dependent, but as a woman who had once built everything he stood on and who could rebuild herself when all was taken. "Grandma, did you really catch Mom stealing?" Tyler asked one Saturday as we walked through Washington Square Park, feeding breadcrumbs to pigeons. At 10, he was old enough to understand some of what had happened, though James had shielded both children from the worst details. "I caught her being dishonest," I replied carefully. "And in this family, we value truth above all else." Emma, at 12, was more perceptive. "Dad says you saved him from making a terrible mistake. He says you're the strongest person he knows." I smiled, touched by James's words, though I wondered if he had truly learned the lesson. Time would tell. As summer approached, I established new routines: yoga in the park on Tuesday mornings, book club at the library on Thursdays, coffee with Martha, who had moved to the city to be closer to her daughter, every Sunday after church. I was building a life defined by choice rather than obligation. One warm evening in June, I received an unexpected visitor. My doorbell rang just as I was finishing dinner. When I opened it, I found Rebecca Winters standing there, notebook in hand. "Mrs. Wilson," she said with a professional smile. "I was hoping we might talk." "Off the record, of course." I invited her in, curious about her visit. "I've been following the legal proceedings against Victoria," she explained as I poured us both iced tea. "She's agreed to a plea deal, 5 years in federal prison, forfeiture of all assets acquired through fraud. Your testimony was instrumental in the case." I nodded, unsurprised by the news. Sarah had kept me updated on the legal developments. "But that's not why I'm here," Rebecca continued. "I'm working on a series about financial elder abuse. Your story could help others recognize the warning signs, understand that they're not alone." I considered her request carefully. "Will this help other women in my position?" "Absolutely. Elder financial abuse is far more common than people realize, especially within families. Your story is powerful because you fought back and won. And so I agreed to share my experience, not for vengeance or publicity, but to illuminate a problem too often hidden in the shadows of family loyalty and obligation. As for Victoria, she vanished from society's stage as quickly as she had climbed it. The last I heard, she was serving her sentence at a minimum security facility in Connecticut, her designer wardrobe exchanged for prison-issued clothing, her social circle reduced to fellow inmates and corrections officers. James filed for divorce and threw himself into rebuilding his firm's reputation. He started a foundation, a real one this time, dedicated to supporting elderly victims of financial abuse. It was his way of making amends, though he knew that no charitable gesture could erase his years of blindness to my situation. And me? I smiled every time I thought of the moment Victoria realized the woman she treated like a maid was the very person who brought her empire to its knees, with nothing but silence, strategy, and a mother's resolve. But I didn't dwell on it. The past was a place I had no interest in inhabiting. Instead, I focused on my future, the writing workshop I'd enrolled in, the travel plans I was making for a trip to Italy in the fall, the friendships I was nurturing. At 67, I was discovering that life could begin again, that dignity once lost could be reclaimed, that strength often comes from the quietest places within us. You know what the best revenge is? Martha asked me one day as we browsed through an art gallery in Soho. What's that? I replied, admiring a landscape that reminded me of the Connecticut countryside where Robert and I had once picnicked. Living well, she said with a knowing smile. And nobody does that better than you, Ellen Wilson. I laughed and linked my arm through hers. Living well isn't revenge, I corrected her gently. It's simply what we all deserve.